some slack. You know, he can't come in and learn it all in 24 hours.
Yeah, but you don't have to live in Labrador to talk about creditor protection. So my understanding is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the pensioners are in a lineup right behind the secured creditors, and they're the head of the line for the unsecured creditor. Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah, that's the regulation, and that was the interpretation of the courts.
So, but when the provincial government is asked to step in, because they've done it elsewhere for one group or one, the Abitibi issue, for instance, that doesn't necessarily make it right or something that should become the precedent, does it? Because if so, boy, we've got to set ourselves up for some dangerous operations in this province, because we've come behind many a business closure and many a regional strife with government money that maybe isn't always the right thing to do, and covering unpaid pension plan contributions on behalf of Cliffs Resources before we even get into the creditor lineup, that comes across as particularly flimsy pander to me.
Well, we can debate whether, we follow established precedents or not, but we've had very few cases in our history in this province where we've had companies go into receivership or file into courts in the way that we have with Wabush and with Abitibi, okay? And we've had very few workers other than the ones in those two companies that have been directly impacted in this way. Mm-hmm. So when you look at precedent, what I look at is what one government does for one group, they should be prepared to do for the other group. What upsets me even more is that when the courts are hearing this, and also with the hearing proceedings that went on, the province did not attend. They didn't provide intervener status, which they have the ability to be able to do on behalf of many of these workers, and they have the lawyers and the legal community and the Department of Justice and everyone else to help them prepare that, whereas the workers don't even have a union today that even represent them anymore. So they're really out there on their own for the most part. The other piece I wanted to say is that under the CCAA, you're right what happens in terms of the pecking order of who gets benefits first. And unfortunately, the workers are ones that go to the bottom of the list. And that's a regulation that needs to change in the country. And people might say, well, why didn't it happen 20 years ago? Well, it's usually when you get into a recession and you get into those kinds of situations that you start learning that, hey, this legislation doesn't work or those laws don't work. This is where the change needs to happen right now, and the Harper government has refused to make that change. And unless that change is made, the same law is going to apply to workers not only in Newfoundland and Labrador, but right across the country that are falling into the same category. In the past year, we've had a lot of manufacturing operations closed in Ontario. We've had other mining operations closed across Canada. So we're not alone in this, but does the regulation right now protect the workers in the way that it should? No, it does not. Mm-hmm. And does it need to be changed? Yes, it does. And we realize that, and we're one party that is prepared to make those changes.
The legislation will be curious as to what approach is there, because, of course, there may indeed be quid pro quo, so that you cannot have legislation that has a detrimental effect on business directly, even if you're trying to protect the worker. I understand, and I think we're on a very similar page. But I'd like to see exactly how that plays out and exactly what the legislation will look like, because we can't oversimplify it, because there is a lot of tricky issues there, overlap with justice, overlap with the labour laws, overlap with pension trustees, and a variety of things. So I know you know all this, and so we'll get to that in time to come. Anything else you want to talk about this morning, though, Yvonne, before we run out of time?
No, other than to say that, I really feel for those workers in Wabush and those pensioners, and everyone in the province feels for them, because every one of us work hard in our lives. We pay into a pension fund for when we retire, and we hope that fund is going to be there. They've been robbed by a company, and unfortunately, this is a company that is still earning huge profits in the U.S., and here we are as Canadian citizens. We've been shafted, yet they came in here, they took our resources, they were propped up by our governments, They were supported by our communities, and then they just left people on the hook. And I don't think there's anyone in this province that don't sympathize with them and understand what they're going through. However, it's not a time to be playing a game with these workers. There are some very legitimate things that have to be done. Right now it's in the courts. The province needs to make sure that they are in the courts, that they are representing these workers on these issues and appealing their case before the judge. Secondly, there needs to be a commitment by all parties, provincially and federally, to work to change the legislation so that workers become protected in Newfoundland and Labrador, but in Canada, and that workers' issues and pension issues are given a priority because it's unfair what has happened to these people, and it could be me or you or someone else tomorrow. Just because we're not with a big corporate company doesn't mean that we won't be impacted at some point in our lives by similar circumstances, especially when you get into recessions and things like this. So it's in all of our best interest to do what is right.
I think you're going down a road there now, which I think would be the fundamental place to start, and that's how do we treat subsidiaries in relation to parent company profitability when we talk about this kind of stuff? Because it's easy to shield yourself and be able to provide audited documents that shows them in some sort of financial strife where they reach out to the government for a break on their power bill or a subsidy or a grant or a tax break period, when in fact they are just a little splinter of a massive multinational that is still making hundreds of millions of dollars per year. That's the trick. I mean, dealing with them so far as creditor protection, that's going to be much more complicated than we're making it out to be today. But it's how we address the subsidiary piece and how that lines up with the obligation by law and through the trustee to commit to all the pension payments. I think that's where we start, personally.
Well, you just put your thumb on the right page. That's exactly where we are. And if you look at how this is trending, not only in this country but in other countries, that's how it's trending right now.
Oh, absolutely right.
And the large companies are protected by the subsidiaries, and they're getting away without having to make the payouts. It's the little guy at the bottom that is suffering at the end of the day, which is wrong. Just one other comment. My campaign has started. I'm in a campaign. I have a candidate that I'm running against in Labrador. I've been right through Labrador, not in every community, but I've been north, south, Labrador Straits, west, Goose Bay, and we're going to keep going until October 19th, and we just encourage people, if they have issues, stop us on the road, stop us at the doors, call our offices. We're more than happy to meet with you and discuss any of the issues that you have on your mind.
You have one in place, but you might have another in the form of Mr. Panashway.
Yeah, I really believe that he's going to run. I heard his comments on the news last week, and looks like he was gearing up. So, it's if it's what he wants to do, I mean, it's an election. Everybody's welcome to be in the race, I guess,
What do you make of it? Because people will, of course, condemn him on a variety of fronts, and the number one thing will be the way that the campaign expenses were handled last time. The finger of blame so far as the courts, and Mr. Panashway himself will land firmly on Reg Bowers as the official agent. We know that's the technical approach that the law must take. But how do you treat that issue as a candidate if and when Mr. Panashway comes forward? Is that how you speak to him and his past victory and his behavior during the campaign? How do you deal with that particular issue?
Well, I don't necessarily deal with Mr. Panashway. I deal with the constituents and the issues that I'm hearing at the doors and what direction people want to move in. With Mr. Panashway, it's really his choice as to what he wants to do. He knows that these are issues that are still unresolved and still being dealt with in the courts, so he's the one that will have to explain that to the electorate if he chooses to run.
Do you think he should be allowed to run until this is settled in the court?
It's really hard to say until there is a verdict and one that is guilty, I guess. One is presumed innocent. However, we do know a lot of circumstances surrounding this, and most of them are very unpalatable. I guess from an issue of morality or principle, I would have to say no. But in terms of an issue of legality, I think he's entitled to run, and it's his decision.
I appreciate your time this morning, Yvonne. I'm glad we finally had a chance to have a chat.
All right, Patty. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.